Good evening, everyone. This week's parsha is Parshas Beshalach, Tavshin Pei Hey. We'll start from the beginning of the parsha, which is Perek Yud Gimel, chapter 13, Pasuk Yud Zayin, verse 17. Okay? So the parsha begins, Vayi Beshalach Paro Yasa'am, and it was when Paro sent out the nation. Le'nachem Elokim derech eretz Plishtim. Hashem did not lead them by the way, Hashem did not lead them on the derech eretz Plishtim, on the way of the land of the Plishtim, of the Philistines. The Karavu, for it was close. Amar Elokim, for Hashem said, Pen Yinachem Ha'amarayim Milchama B'Shavim Mitzrayim, lest the nation have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. Vayasev Elokim Esa'am Derech HaMidbar Yamsuf. So Hashem took the people around towards the way of the wilderness, to the Sea of Reeds. And the children of Israel were armed when they went up from Egypt. So what we have here is, in this very first pasuk, that there would have been a reason to lead the Jewish people by the way on the way of the land of the Plishtim, of the Philistines. But Hashem said no, because the nation may see war. The nation is going to see war, and that's going to cause them to return to Egypt. So there would have been a way to have taken, there would have been a good reason to take them by way of the land of the Plishtim. But Hashem says no, because maybe they're going to see war and decide to turn back to Egypt. Now the question is, the words ki karov hu. Hashem did not lead them by way of the land of Plishtim, for it was close. For it was close means what? What is the point of, what is the meaning of for it was close? It was close, and therefore what? What was close, and what was it close to, and therefore what? How does it connect to the fact that it says Hashem didn't lead them by the way of the land of the Plishtim? He didn't lead them that way because if they see war, they're going to turn around and go. Where does the fact that it's close how does that fit in? What do you want to say? You want to say something? Okay. So Ramban, Nachmanides.
Different close to the Mitzrayim, close to final destination.
Okay. That could be part of the question. Okay. So the Ramban, when he explains the pasuk like this. So actually Rashi, let's go back to Rashi for a second. When Rashi explains that Hashem did not lead them by the way of the land of the Plishtim, for it was close, it means that path, that way, that direction, that route, was close to Egypt. And because it was close to Egypt, it would have been easy for them to turn around and go back. So if they go by way of the land of the Plishtim, and they land up with some nation attacking them as they pass by, it'll be very easy to turn around and go back to Egypt. And therefore Hashem did not take them that easy path, that path of the Plishtim, which would seemingly have been the more direct route to go. Meaning the land of the Plishtim, as we're going to see, both in Rashi and the Ramban, that would have been the most direct and best way to go to where they're planning on going. Which would have been, where were they planning on going now from Egypt? They were planning on going to Mount Sinai to get the Torah. And they're planning on going to Eretz Yisrael. So, the best route, the best route to have gone would have been to have gone by the way of the Plishtim. The problem is, to go by the way of the land of the Plishtim, that's close to Egypt. It's easy to go back to Egypt from there. And if they would be attacked by someone, they'd have an easy chance to turn around and go back. And therefore, instead of taking them by the way of the Plishtim, which would have been the more direct way to go, but because it was also very easy to go back to Egypt from there, Hashem took them in a more roundabout way through the desert. Ramban explains, similarly, it's similar in the fact that everybody agrees that the most direct way to go would have been to have gone by the way of the land of the Plishtim. But the Ramban says, Ki karev hu means that actually, as we said before, that Hashem did not take them by the way of the land of the Plishtim, for the land of the Plishtim was close, meaning that route was the closest route to get where they had to go to. That would have been the best way to go. But Hashem said, no, we're not going that way. Why? Because maybe they're going to see war. Maybe someone's going to attack them. Who's going to attack them?
Amalek.
No. That's what Ramban says. Who's going to attack them? If they go by the way of the Plishtim, who's going to attack them? Plishtim. They're going to go by the land of the Plishtim. The Plishtim are going to go ahead and attack them. And they're going to decide, okay, we're going back. We're going back. So therefore, Hashem does not take them by way of the Plishtim, which would have been a way of bringing war upon them, but rather they took them into the desert. Now, by taking them into the desert, they didn't go past the Plishtim. They didn't go near anybody.
I don't know anybody.
There was the way the Ramban explains. There was no one there was no other country in the vicinity that would have been an issue. The way he says it is, if they would have gone by the way of the desert that they were going now, they would have landed up. The first war they'd have to fight was when they'd be on the other side of the Jordan River before going into Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Sichon and Og, which we'll read about in the book of Bamidbar, right? That was that was a land that they were destined to conquer before they'd even go into Eretz Yisrael. It was actually destined to be somewhat part of Eretz Yisrael. So if they go now by way of the desert, says the Ramban, the only nation that they'd ever meet up with to have a war with would be the nations of Sichon and the nations that were governed by Sichon and Og. That would have been their first war, which was destined to be their first war anyway. So according to the Ramban, the pasuk is saying, Hashem did not take them by way of the Plishtim, which was the close way to get to where they wanted to go. Because if they would go that way by the Plishtim would definitely attack them, and then they would turn around and go back. Therefore, what does Hashem do? Hashem takes them into the desert, away from the Plishtim, away from any kind of nation that they be passing by. There would be no issue of war. Plus, he also says they would have been pretty far away from Egypt also, and that will solve the problem. You follow that? But there's a question. You just mentioned something before. When I asked you who's going to attack them, what'd you say?
Amalek.
Amalek, right? Here we know in this week's parsha, as they're going through the desert, right after the splitting of the Red Sea, and they're going through the desert, they do have a war. They have a war. If the whole point was to avoid, by going to the desert, was to avoid war, but doesn't it seem that that wasn't the right way to go? Because look, Amalek, they had a war with Amalek.
But Amalek nobody expected, even Hashem did not expect.
Well, I don't say that, but the answer is like you're saying, Amalek came to them to attack. It's not like the Jewish people passed by Amalek, and because they passed by, like they would have been passing by the Plishtim would have attacked. The Amalek didn't attack because they passed by. Amalek came out to attack them. Okay? Now, let's say Amalek comes to attack them, and they say, we're going back to Egypt. Is that going to solve the problem? No, because Amalek wants to kill them. So even if they turn out to go back to Egypt, Amalek is going to still go after them. So the Ramban is saying Amalek was not, to a certain degree, wasn't part of the plan. Meaning they weren't going to be passing by the land of Amalek for the purposes of in their travels the way they were going. Amalek came to attack them. And if Amalek came to attack them, going back to Egypt wouldn't have been a solution anyway. And also, he says, it wouldn't have been a solution because at that point, they would have been pretty far from Egypt. So therefore, the whole way that the Ramban learns here is that the pasuk is saying the way to have gone would have been by way of the Plishtim because it was the closest to where they wanted to go. It was the straightest, most direct way to get to where they wanted to go, which I understand means Mount Sinai. Maybe it even means the Yam Suf. I'm not sure exactly, according to the Ramban, what that destination was. But is it the Yam Suf? Is it Har Sinai? But whatever destination it was, that would have been the most direct and easy way to go. The problem is, going that way, passing by the Plishtim, was bringing war upon the Jewish people, and being attacked by a nation they were passing by would have been a reason for them to say, we're going back. So therefore, Hashem took them into the desert so that they wouldn't pass by any nation that would attack them. Amalek attacked them. That's because Amalek came after them. Amalek came to attack them. Amalek, basically, according to Ramban, saying they weren't passing by Amalek, but Amalek came out to attack them after the splitting of the Red Sea. And if they would have decided to go back to Egypt, it would have helped anyway, because Amalek wanted to destroy them, and they would have kept trying to destroy them, even if they wanted to decide to go back to Egypt. Okay, that is Ramban. Now, I want to share with you now another interpretation brought down by the commentator Rabbeinu Bachya, and he brings from Rabbeinu Hananel. Rabbeinu Hananel was one of the early Rishonim. He preceded the Rambam. He was from the early of the period of the Rishonim. Rabbeinu Hananel says like this. Rabbeinu Hananel says, he starts off, very similar to the Ramban, that if the way to have, truthfully, Rashi agrees to that also, essentially, that the most direct way to get to travel now to where they wanted to go was next to the land of the Plishtim. That would have been the most direct way, but that would have been a way of bringing war, and therefore Hashem took them into the desert. But why did Hashem? The Rabbeinu Hananel takes a bigger picture here, and he says, why did Hashem want them into the desert? So the Ramban said, because let's not have any wars. Rabbeinu Hananel says there was a much bigger reason for going into the desert. Hashem wanted the Jewish people to go into the desert because in the desert they'd experience very big miracles. They would experience the mun. They experienced the mun. They experienced the quail. They experienced the water. And by going into the desert, which is so uninhabitable, and nonetheless they survive to the miracles, that is a very big miracle. Now he says, that's the real reason why Hashem wants them to be taken into the desert. He wants to get the Jewish people to the desert so that he makes big miracles for them in the desert, for them to survive. Now, but the pasuk doesn't say that. The pasuk says that Hashem led them into the desert because of the war. Says Rabbeinu Hananel, a fascinating idea. If Hashem wanted to, Hashem could have done another miracle or a different miracle, right? He could have put it into the hearts of the Plishtim not to start up with the Jewish people. He could have done that. He could have prevented them from attacking the Jewish people, which would have been a certain level of a miracle too, because the norm would have been for the Plishtim to attack, even though they were just coming out of Egypt. But that would have been enough. The Plishtim would have attacked them. So you know what Hashem could do? Not let them attack them. Let the Jewish people go by the Plishtim. Let them go the most direct way that they have to go. And there won't be any problem with the Plishtim. Why? Because Hashem won't let the Plishtim attack. It'll be a miracle too. Says Rabbeinu Hananel, but Hashem always wants to do the bigger miracle. He wants to do for the Jewish people the bigger miracle. What's a bigger miracle? To have the Plishtim not attack and the Jewish people just go straight to where they have to go, or to take them to the desert, an uninhabitable desert, a desert that people typically can't survive in. And there he would do miracles for them to survive. That's the bigger miracle. And that is what Hashem wanted to do. And then he cites other examples of where we see that Hashem could have done what we'll call a smaller miracle, but he does a bigger miracle. And he goes to the story of Daniel, the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel was a Jewish person. He was exiled from the land of Israel. This was during the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. And he landed up in Bavel, in Babylonia. And he was an advisor. He was a very important advisor. He was a very important servant by the king, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar made a decree that there's a certain statue that he set up, and then everybody has to bow down to that statue. Or certain people have to bow down to the statue. And there were 3 people that are mentioned in the book of Daniel, who their names there are different than the way we know them. We know them as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he demanded Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to bow down to this statue. And they refused. They said they can't do it. They cannot bow down to a statue. So he decided, he was so enraged, this was Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, who destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. He was so enraged by that. Pass those tissues, please. He was so enraged by that he actually took them and commanded that they be thrown into a burning furnace. It was a burning furnace with a fire. It says that he made the fire go much higher and much stronger than usual, and he commanded that the Nebuchadnezzar and Azar be thrown into the fire. And what happened? They survived. It says Nebuchadnezzar saw them kind of walking around in the fire. And then he told them to come out. And the book of Daniel describes that they came out of the fire. Their clothing was perfect. Their hair wasn't singed, wasn't burned. They didn't even have a smell of fire on them. And they had that miracle. There was a big miracle. Nebuchadnezzar was highly, highly moved by that miracle. Okay, says Rabbeinu Hananel, all right, there's a choice here. When Hashem did the miracle of Sefer Chamishal Azariah, what choices did he have? He had one choice, that they're going to put up the fire, right? They're going to make the fire go. What's going to happen to it? Poof, it's going to go out. It's going to go out. Here it is. They're trying to make this fire. There's no reason for the fire not to work, and it goes out. It goes out. It goes out. That would have been a miracle.
No fire.
No, I mean they put up a fire, and the fire goes out. That could have been a miracle too.
Okay.
Says Rabbeinu Hananel, what's a bigger miracle? For the fire to go out, or for these three men to be thrown into the fire and survive it?
Okay.
The answer is be thrown into the fire and survive it. That's a bigger miracle. Here's another example that he gives with Daniel himself. Daniel was a very, he was an important servant by the next king after Nebuchadnezzar died, Daryavish, and the other servants of Daryavish were very jealous of Daniel, and they tried to get him in trouble. So what do? They convinced Daryavish that anyone caught making a request from anyone, even from a god, other than asking from him, gets killed. And he made that decree, was convinced. Anybody who is caught making a request from anyone but me is going to be killed. What did Daniel do? Daniel had a place in his room where he davened every day. Well, he quietly went to his room and he davened. And the other ministers came and caught him. They caught him davening. They caught him asking from other than the king. So they went back to the king. They told the king, he just broke the law. You got to carry out the law. And at the end, Daryavish had no means, and he had Daniel thrown into a lion's den. That means a place where there are a bunch of hungry lions. He had him thrown into the den. There was a rock put over. A den is like a hole in the ground, big hole in the ground. They had a rock put on top of it, so he shouldn't be able to get out. But Daryavish told Daniel that Hashem is going to protect you. And the next day, it says Daryavish couldn't sleep a whole night. The next day, he runs over to the pit, to the den. He says, Daniel, you alive? He says, yeah. And they open up the thing, and he's fine. And he's fine. Nothing happened to him. So it says. So now, what were the choices there? What were the choices? The choices were that what Hashem could have done is Hashem could have had, right, all the lions drop dead. The eel gets thrown into the lion's den. There's a bunch of lions, or hungry lions, and what happens to them? They all fall asleep or they all die. That could have happened. What does Hashem do? No. They're alive, they're good, they're well, they're hungry, and they still don't touch Daniel. And he says that's the same idea here. Hashem wants to perform a miracle for them. He wants them to go into the desert and survive. That's a much bigger miracle than just having the Plishtim leave them alone. Now, what is so important about these miracles? Why does Hashem want these miracles for the Jewish people in the desert? The answer is because, as he says, whatever the Jewish people experienced in the desert was a test, was a challenge. There was no food. They ran out of food. How are they going to survive? They didn't have, the water was bitter. How are they going to have water? how were they going to have what they needed to be able to survive and to live? So Hashem took them into an uninhabitable desert, did big miracles for them, and what would that accomplish? That would accomplish Rabbeinu Chananel, that the Jewish people would learn bitachon. They would learn to trust in Hashem. They would learn that when they have a need, where do their needs come from? The needs come from Hashem. Here they are in a desert, they have nothing to survive on, and it comes very clear to them that Hashem is helping them survive, but not just in a small way, in a big way, in a very big way. Because here they are out there in the desert. He gives an example, Rabbeinu Chananel, when the Jewish people were crossing the Red Sea, right? And it says the water split. So how did it split? All of a sudden the whole path split and they walked through? He says what happened is as they walked through, the water split. As they were walking, the water split, which in essence creates a challenge for them to believe that Hashem will get them through. And it's a bigger miracle that this is what's happening to them instead of, the whole thing splits and you just walk through. But it's all part of developing within the Jewish people what Rabbeinu Chananel calls bitachon, trust in Hashem, understanding that Hashem runs the world. Everything comes from Hashem. He runs the world. And all this would now be put into them, be instilled in them by them going into the desert, experiencing the challenge and the tests of the desert. And maybe we can argue that when they were challenged, they reacted maybe not in a great way. They should have maybe reacted better. But at the end of the day, all these situations were meant for them to come to a state of need, serious need, and understand that their needs are met by Hashem, which they saw through the miracles in a very uninhabitable place that normally people can't survive. That was the goal of having them come into the desert and have the challenges and have the miracles. It was all about developing their understanding of bitachon, of trust in Hashem, that Hashem takes care of everyone's needs. He is the one who runs the world, and that's who they are to turn to.
How about this all miracle, high miracle in Mitzrayim? This is not enough to convince?
No, because it was not a situation where their needs were lacking. It was important for them to actually experience a lack of a need, and that need should be taken care of with a miracle. That's a good question you're asking. But I think the point here is that the goal in the desert was to have a test regarding a need that they have, and then that need should be taken care of with a great miracle. That is what would instill in them bitachon, knowing that Hashem runs the world and putting their trust in Him for their needs.
Makes sense. I mean, miracle for in Mitzrayim more for other nations than.
Well, it was for them too, because it helps them understand, recognize Hashem and Hashem's power. But it's very different when it's something that becomes very relevant and very, very, very much to your needs. It's very different. So just to put it all together, what Rabbeinu Chananel is doing is, Rabbeinu Chananel is saying, like the Ramban, the pasuk says, they should have gone through the land of the Plishtim. It was the closest, most direct route where they had to go. The problem is, you can't go that way because the Plishtim would have attacked them and they would have turned around and left. You'll say, hey, so let there be a miracle that Plishtim won't touch them. If this is what they have to do, this is where they have to go, have a miracle happen that Plishtim won't touch them. The answer is because the goal was to get them into the desert. And even though it would have been a miracle for the Plishtim not to attack, the bigger miracle was to take them into the desert. And in the desert, they'd have the bigger miracle where you see the greatness of Hashem even more. And it would all be in the context of challenges to their basic needs so that they would understand that their needs are met by Hashem, who runs the world, and it's to Him that they turn for their needs. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful evening.
This convinced me.